Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So welcome everyone to a Wednesday evening with us at Clear Mountain. For those of you just joining us, this is a chance for us to discuss Dhamma in more detail, and please feel free to type into the chat any questions you have that are coming up or comments. But generally, we can begin the session by talking about a certain subject. And today I wanted to take one that the Buddha really singled out as very meaningful, and that's the subject of gain, honor, and praise. So often, speaking with those who come to alms round or to Saturday gatherings or just people I meet, this theme or thread of how much attention and suffering and anxiety and fear and craving and wanting to belong, to receive approval. The reoccurring theme of this in the people I talk to in their lives and minds and hearts always moves me. And when one hears the Buddha speak, as he often does, about the drawbacks, the dangers of gain, honor, and praise, it can become easy to dismiss it or to look over it as one more phrase among many in the suttas, without realizing that in it, in pointing to this quality of our obsession with how others think about us, how we want to be cared for, appreciated, liked, how this nerve is central in most of our lives and a driving force of the 8 worldly winds: pleasure, pain, gain, loss, fame, disrepute, praise, blame. 4 of them, 1/2, are all about the buffeting of these winds, these worldly forces of what others think, of what we are. And to acknowledge, as I've said before, that this is no minor thread of concern. This is a biologically built-in necessity to the brain. In the troops of chimpanzees, which we evolved from, the difference between acceptance and non-acceptance was life and death, more often than even whether we got a meal or not on a certain day. So to acknowledge that there's an enormous part of our brain constantly calculating our relationship in the hierarchy of social interaction next to others around us, if we're appreciated, if we're not. They've done studies where they poured slightly differing, before a sort of random test, they poured slightly different amounts of, I think it was orange juice, into people's glasses, the test volunteers, without telling them that that was the real variable. And those that got slightly less orange juice poured into their glass, it just affected their entire experience of the subsequent examination profoundly. All they could, or a huge portion of what they thought about was just why they got less orange juice. So to see that this is significant, and the Buddha set aside an entire chapter of the Connected Discourses, the Samyutta Nikaya, dedicated towards speaking about this force in our hearts, the craving to be accepted. Often gain, honor, and praise can seem like we're just speaking about the flush of fame or a sort of wider scope of praise in society. I think it's important here to realize and to recontextualize those terms just in terms of your own life, the more humble, mundane experiences of uh, being praised by the people around you, feeling, the situation where you see a group chatting in the corner and feel that wrenching pull to be part of whatever they are, and that almost raw nerve of not being, of being talked over in a group, of being misinterpreted, of being thought to be something that you don't feel you are, or to have done something bad you don't believe you did, when someone takes the credit you believe you deserve. Um, all these constant cravings, and also the flush, the light side, which when we get drunk on, we expose ourselves to the shadow of, the flush of getting the praise from the one you love, of being approved by um, a parent, by a child. When the Buddha speaks about gain, honor, and praise, you can really ground that in your day-to-day experience. We all encounter this pull of the heart in the most mundane ways. It does not have to be on social media. It does not have to be a flash of fame. It can be walking into a work meeting and not being acknowledged or being applauded. This is the push and pull of the heart we're speaking to. And the Buddha, there's a sutta called the Tuataka Sutta, or no, Contemplation of Dyads in the Sutta Nipata, 3.12. And in it, the Buddha says, what the noble ones perceive as pleasant, the world perceives as painful. What the world perceives as pleasant, the noble ones perceive as painful. This essence of the Dharmic path being a radical inversion of how we see the world. It's almost like when you look at trees and suddenly see, if you shift your focus, you can see kind of trees of light standing between the trees of wood. And so often, Eden, heaven, beauty, the Dhamma is right there in front of us. It just requires us to take a photographic negative vision of how the world sees the world. And in this case, that can mean seeing this flush of acceptance not as a benefit, but as an obstacle, because we become drunk on it, because we dedicate our lives to it. So really this radical shift of vision and leaning into the wind, in a sense of actually appreciating, well, first seeing the drawbacks of that. So Richard Rohr, a priest who many of you may know, says that everything he learned before, uh, all the success he had before 30, before 30, you need some success to build self-esteem. But after 30, everything he's learned has been from failure and disappointment. And I think that's profound, because it's true in a sense. There's this humbling, this constant relinquishing of the ego that can occur if you really encounter face to face with a tender heart the sense of not getting exactly what you want in this domain. And when you do get it, then in a sense you're tying and become drunk on it, begin to crave it and feed off of it. That's the key. Gain, honor, and praise will come, but how much do you let it get you? How much do you become intoxicated on it? And when that happens, you've begun to tie your heart to the world, and the shadow will come. If you can't always be praised, you can't always be approved of, and to some extent, at some point, even if you don't explicitly see the shadow, the praise won't always be good enough, as good. There's no winning when you tie your heart to this. So the next inversion of the vision is seeing the benefits of humbling, of not getting it. And I think it really helps to look towards the saints in our lives around this. So, or the saints we've heard of, to recollect that there's humble monks and nuns out in forests and caves right now, meditating in quiet, in humility, um, with glowing hearts that have real effect on the world. Um, that's a powerful recollection. You can think of the teacher of Ken MacLeod, for example, who was the sewing monk at a Tibetan monastery, and one day he just became sick of it and locked himself in the latrine in Tibet, and didn't come out for, I believe, 9 years, just dedicating his life to green Tara practice. And after a few weeks, the monks just started slipping him food underneath the door, but he stayed there in quiet, humble practice for at least 9 years. It may have been more. But to remember these quiet people who have existed on the peripheries and how they're still there. And the Christians have a saying that the less well known you are, the bigger your angel. So this is the process, is you understand that if you watch that flush, it's easy to see of gain, honor, and praise. But if you see even more clearly the raw vibrating nerve, the wound of not getting that, of wanting to be acknowledged, of wanting to be first in line, and let it pass, let it burn through you for a time, and just come back to a mantra or the body. You can say something like, come home, come home. Patient endurance is the supreme incinerator of defilement. Sitting in the fire is what they call meditation. Let the fire burn through you. And then on the other side of that raw nerve, when you don't jump into the conversation that you weren't, in an ungraceful way because you're compelled to, if you wait through that, you'll notice there's this peace on the other side. And have faith that on that quiet other, there's a silent, quiet, calm majesty that is visible to others. You don't have to worry about not being seen. If you move through that raw animal instinct to be acknowledged, to insert yourself, watch what happens if you just stay still and then watch the quiet unfolding of these wings of something much deeper and presence. And people will see. They'll be baffled by you taking the last seat. And it's good to lean against the wind. Like if you want to go first, go last. If you want to speak up, just try to be quiet and see what's on the other side of that. And it's a majesty. So people should type in questions that they want to discuss. But in the meantime, I just wanted to read some verses from this chapter, the Samyutta Nikaya. It's Samyutta Nikaya, chapter 17, Labhasakara Samyutta, gain, honor, and praise. And the Buddha dedicated a whole chapter to this, and it's great. So let's read. The dung beetle. Monastics. Gains, honor, offerings, and fame are a cruel thing, a harsh, bitter obstacle to the attainment of the unexcelled rest from bondage. Suppose there were a beetle, a dung-eater, full of dung, gorged with dung, with a huge pile of dung in front of him. He, because of that, would look down on the other beetles. Yes, sirree, I am a dung-eater, full of dung, gorged with dung, with a huge pile of dung in front of me. In the same way, there is the case where a certain monk, conquered by gains, offerings, and fame, his mind consumed, puts on his robes, and carrying his bowl and outer robe, goes into a village or town for alms. Having eaten there as much as he likes, full of alms food, and invited again for the next day, he goes to the monastery, and in the midst of a group of monks boasts, I have eaten as much as I like. I am full of alms food, and have been invited again for tomorrow. I am a recipient of robes, alms food, lodgings, and medicinal requisites for curing illness. These other monks, though, have next to no merit, next to no influence. They aren't recipients of robes, alms foods, lodgings, and medicinal requisites for curing illness. Conquered by gains, offerings, and fame, his mind consumed, he looks down on other well-behaved monks. His mind consumed. I love that. That will be for this worthless man's long-term suffering and harm. That's how cruel gains, offerings, and fame are, a harsh, bitter obstacle to the attainment of the unexcelled rest from bondage. Thus you should train yourselves. We will put aside any gains, offerings, and fames that have arisen, and we will not let any gains, offerings, and fame that have arisen keep our minds consumed. That is how you should train yourselves. I know that when I talked to a certain practitioner about this, she immediately went and looked up a video of a dung beetle waving its little hands on its pile of dung. The Buddha had a great sense of humor. The jackal. Monks. Gains, offerings, and fame are a cruel thing, a harsh, bitter obstacle to the attainment of the unexcelled rest from bondage. Have you heard the jackal howling in the last hours of the night? Yes, Lord. That jackal is suffering from mange. He finds no pleasure whether he goes to a bluff, to the foot of a tree, or to the open air. Wherever he goes, wherever he stands, wherever he sits, wherever he lies down, he is sunk in misery. In the same way, there is the case where a certain monk is conquered by gains, offerings, and fame, his mind consumed. He finds no pleasure whether he goes to an empty dwelling, to the foot of a tree, or to the open air. Wherever he goes, wherever he stands, wherever he sits, wherever he lies down, he is sunk in misery. That's how cruel gains, offerings, and fame are, a harsh, bitter obstacle to the attainment of the unexcelled rest from bondage. Thus you should train yourselves. We will put aside any gains, offerings, and fame that have arisen, and we will not let any gains, offerings, and fame that have arisen keep our minds consumed. That is how you should train yourselves. Just reflecting on how that obsession is never sated, just like mange is never, it just keeps on itching. A golden bowl. This is a different translation. Possessions, honor, and popularity are brutal. When I've comprehended the mind of a certain person, I understand. This venerable would not tell a deliberate lie, even for the sake of a golden bowl filled with silver powder. But sometime later, I see them tell a deliberate lie because their mind is overcome and overwhelmed by possessions, honor, and popularity. So brutal are possessions, honor, and popularity. A rope. Possessions, honor, and popularity are brutal. They cut through the outer skin, the inner skin, the flesh, sinews, and bones, until they reach the marrow and stay pressing there. Suppose a strong man was to twist a tough horsehair rope around your shin and tighten it. It would cut through the outer skin, the inner skin, the flesh, sinews, and bones, until it reached the marrow and stayed pressing there. In the same way, possessions, honor, and popularity cut through the outer skin, the inner skin, the flesh, sinews, and bones, until they reach the marrow and stay pressing there. So brutal are possessions, honor, and popularity. Only daughter. A faithful laywoman with a dear and beloved only daughter would rightly appeal to her, "My darling, please be like the laywoman Kujutara or Velukantaki, Nanda's mother. These are the standard and measure for my female lay disciples, that is, the laywoman Kujutara and Velukantaki, Nanda's mother. But, my darling, if you go forth from the lay life to homelessness, please be like the nuns Kema and Upalavana. These are a standard and measure for my nun disciples, that is, the nuns Kema and Upalavana. And, my darling, may you not come into possessions, honor, and popularity while you're still a trainee and haven't achieved your heart's desire, that is, liberation. If a trainee who hasn't achieved their heart's desire comes into possessions, honor, and popularity, it's an obstacle for them. So brutal are possessions, honor, and popularity." And one more. Mother. Possessions, honor, and popularity are brutal, bitter, and harsh. They're an obstacle to reaching the supreme sanctuary from the yoke. When I've comprehended the mind of a certain person, I understand. This venerable one would not tell a deliberate lie even for the sake of their mother. But sometime later, I see them tell a deliberate lie because their mind is overcome and overwhelmed by possessions, honor, and popularity. So brutal are possessions, honor, and popularity, bitter and harsh, an obstacle to reaching the supreme sanctuary from the yoke. So you should train like this. we will give up arisen possessions, honor, and popularity, and we won't let them occupy our minds. That is how you should train. Just to see the Buddha acknowledge the power of this force in us and speak out of such compassion to its danger. It's such a gift because it really allows that complete turning and that complete shift in view that will let the heart become free. He acknowledges how much of a hook this is, how insidious it is. And so he reminds us that, these things may come, obviously, but do not let them eclipse in your vision what is greater. And to some extent, acknowledge that if the praise is not coming, if the approval's not there, if you're forced to give up a measure of ego, it's actually a good thing. It leads you to a greater humbling and majesty. And in the Buddhist view, this life is just one brief moment. And even if you don't believe in such things, just knowing that this moment is just a second or a, a point instant on a long and extending line of a life. It's next to nothing. And the more you tie your heart to the vicissitudes of samsara, the more the heart will break. And that there's something very profound to be found in the quiet humbling that can happen over time. And that won't just happen if, you resist those moments of not getting what you want. But if you turn towards them as a gift, this is a moment to learn to be humble, to relinquish a little bit of ego, then this is the path. So I hope people found benefit in these verses. Once again, that's the Samyutta Nikaya, Connected Discourses, chapter 17. And you can find it on suttacentral.org if you'd like, or anywhere on the internet, really. So we have a chance for questions. Type in the chat. Okay. Spoof. Ajahn, how do we tell the difference between wanting praise because we're greedy and needing encouragement because our heart is malnourished? That's a good question. I think some of it might be because, yes, most of us need to exist in an environment where we feel safe and appreciated, and that is significant. What I'd say is Ajahn Amaro compares practice to sharpening a knife. If in balancing calm, centered meditation or seclusion and engagement with the world. So if we're too engaged with the world and aren't coming back to our center or meditation often enough, it's like the angle of the knife is too sharp, it blunts the edge. If we're always in seclusion and never coming into the world, or rarely, then it's like the angle is too shallow and the knife doesn't get sharper. To sharpen the knife of wisdom, you want just the right balance. And that's really something you have to find for yourself. Like one good measure is, can you remain aware of your body, grounded? Are you able to kind of distinguish? Are you able to respond rather than react and keep your anchor? And I'd say in terms of this balance of stepping into the difficulty of not getting praise versus trying to find an environment that feels safe and appreciative, you need to find a similar balance of just the right angle. So if you feel generally appreciated by the people around you, I think that's just necessary and important, a feeling of safety. And then when the praise comes or the disrepute, if there's a sense you can stay grounded in a sense of genuine well-being and feeling of self-worth, and look on it with wisdom. Be mindful of its pain in the body, how it feels, not react to it. Remain with your body, be able to sit with it, and just have that much presence to know that you're kind of sitting with the fire, through the fire. Then it means the angle is not too sharp. If you begin to come to a point where you're really getting lost, and it's beginning to, that lack of approval, that constant, say, disrepute from, say, a work environment or a boss that's something, how I articulate it is sometimes with those situations, there comes a point where it begins to crystallize in you into something that feels lasting. The dynamic begins to crust into a part of you that it feels like it's taking up residence in a way that's not healthy. And I'd say that's a really good indicator you need to step away from that. So, um, yeah, I'd say that's just important. But trying to find, a sense of safety and that genuine well-being is important. It's more that flush of this is what I want, or the letdown of not getting that approval. Um, Really becoming mindful of that in every moment you can. But in the meantime, you want to cultivate a work environment, a family, a friend group, that you feel safe in and appreciated. And that's the beauty of Dhamma groups. And really lean into that. Like, it's good to feel safe and appreciated, and you'll get plenty of chances to work with, gain honor, and praise, because when you find those people who are kind, who you value, there's going to be a lot of opportunities where they're getting together and you weren't invited, or you can't make it. You'll have plenty of chances to work with, gain honor, and praise. So I'd say really leaning into a place where you feel appreciated and safe. Um, and then in a dharmic sense, and acknowledging that we do need that, but then being aware and practicing with the flush and the letdown, the flush of getting that sense of praise and the letdown of not. I hope that's helpful. How do you balance the ego wanting to be recognized, but also the brutality of the superego that loves to see you taken down a peg as you challenge this in your day to day? I'd say that these are really interesting questions. One really useful quality of meditation is you get to see these things in technicolor, play out. You get to sit after a day where you got praised or taken down a notch, and you see the differing voices. You see the voice of the heart, which loves it. And then if you do have this, I don't think everyone's superego manifests. As far as I know, in Freudian psychology, the superego often manifests as an element that restrains, and often it has the harsh internalized voice of a parent, uh, internalized from when someone was a child. But I don't know if it totally likes the ego to be completely ripped apart either. I think it has its own sense of self-preservation, but I do know what you're speaking to, the self-deprecation. Um, so you get to see that in your meditation too, and that superego, that uh, self-recrimination, self-flagellating force is such a potent instinct in, or internalized conditioned part of moderns. It is so sad to see people who are so good be so cruel to themselves. And that's one of the great benefits of meditation, is you just get to see it play out. Um, so, as you sit, you'll see these exact things manifest. You'll see that voice speak, say, I deserve to be taken down today. I'm just, I'm nothing. And the beauty of mindfulness is you begin to step back and you get to see, I don't believe in that completely. I'm not that thought. And what really helps is picking out its tone of voice. See who it sounds like. Does it sound like your mom, like your dad, like someone you know? Uh, is that something you would say to a friend? Imagine yourself, talk to yourself as a friend, and uh, I'd say there's not really a quick answer to it except to develop loving kindness and to, um, over time, just see the violence in that narrative, and that letting go of the craving and feeding off of gain, honor, and praise is not a violent stamping down of one's ego. It's relinquishment. There's a word in Buddhism called chaga, and that's the open hand giving, letting go, bloy wong, in the words of Longpo Cha. So I'd say there's not a quick way around distinguishing between a wholesome letting go and a super egoic, self-recriminating piling on, except just to sit with them over time and gain more mindfulness of the tone of your mind. Is it Mara's voice or is it wisdom? Great question, by the way. Dear Ajahn, sometimes incessant thinking is caused by fear of not having words to say. This is rooted in ego and desire for praise. How to surrender to silence and overcome the social anxiety. Hmm. I have to admit, I'm a bit of an extrovert, so I don't do this as much or have as much of this issue. I would say learning to trust questions. Um, most, it's very easy to find nice people. It's very hard to find curious people, though. And if you're not sure what to say in a conversation, what witty thing you might say or how you might display who you are, because some of it's motivated by the desire for praise, but some of it genuinely might be connection. So I'd say to answer this question or to approach it, I would just encourage a balance of two things. One is in terms of silence, have a mantra. And it helps sometimes to have a mala. You can go to our website and request one. We have these beautiful Clear Mountain Blessed malas that we'll mail you for free. But have a mala in your pocket where no one can see it and just go through a word that keeps you centered, like love, love, listen, listen, quiet, quiet, patience, hold, still, Christ, Buddha, awake, whatever works for you, whatever kind of makes you feel a little calm. Or Buddhang Saranam Gacchami, Dhammang Saranam Gacchami, Sanghang Saranam Gacchami. I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha. And that will really hold you in a certain centered place. You'll have something to do with the mind and it'll be beautiful. Like then you have this kind of beautiful stability and loving kindness that will emerge when you do speak. So having faith in that. In terms of engaging, really believing the power of questions. So if it helps to make a little list of questions that just work for people, or work, that you can kind of go to if you kind of blank out when you don't know how to approach a conversation, like what's been coming up for you? How are your kids? Do you have kids? What have you, if it's someone you really trust, you can talk about practice with. What's meaningful to you? Um, what have you found that's meaningful? Where do you find meaning these days? You can decide how steeply you can angle for their heart, but questions are so beautiful and people want so badly to be heard. If you just show that interest, that's a gift. You don't have to say anything witty. You don't have to say much. Just ask questions and then reflect back. And then, yes, you'll have a chance to speak to your own experience probably sometime, but learn to be quiet. But then when you speak, see what it's like to really lean into asking questions. It's a game. Try to find their dharmic language. Can you find their way to their heart, what they find meaningful, what their suffering and triumph is? And it's really fun to encounter people who do that. So I would say, yeah, that's a really good route to engagement. It's questions. It's rare in the world. Ajahn, what is the difference between rejoicing at goodness and praise? Hmm. The Buddha actually speaks to this. I think in most contexts, um, they will often be phrased the same. Um, and the thing is, it's the job of the boss, of the spouse, of the friend, to show appreciation for what's been done. And this is praise, but it's also rejoicing in goodness. It's the job as you, as the recipient, to notice how attached you get, how the flush, and to restrain the heart's movement towards that, and to notice the letdown when the next time you don't get acknowledged or someone else does. Um, so both people have a role. Praise and rejoicing in goodness are not a bad thing to necessarily give, if you're skillful in it. Um, but one thing the Buddha does say is, one praises and disparages by speaking in terms of individuals. There's a sutta where he speaks to this in detail. I think it's Majjhima Nikaya 103. So this, you know, a person who engages in sensual desires is bound for suffering, something like that, where he says one who speaks in terms of Dhamma speaks in terms of qualities. So he says, a state bound to sensual desires is um, is one rife with suffering, something like that. So if you're looking for how to express rejoicing and goodness in terms of Dhamma, you can always try that. Like, say, rejoice in the qualities of the mind state someone cultivated rather than really singling out the individual. So, say at a gathering, maybe I would say something like, those who helped with the malas, restringing them, that was a beautiful act. And they cultivated, these beautiful mind states. Can we rejoice in that? Something like that might be a route. Ajahn, thanks so much for your teachings. They're really amazing. Thank you. My question, have you heard? Have I heard? Here we go. The phrase touch starvation. How do monks thrive while receiving so little physical touch? I find myself sometimes craving more hugs, cuddles, etc. Yes, yes. We don't get many hugs. There are some monks I hug every now and again. But a monastery cat's great. I don't think we'll actually have a monastery cat, but I think the monasteries I've been to that have cats or dogs, petting them is always really nice. It just, having contact with another being. Occasional massages, just in terms of a foot massage. Not getting one, I would feel embarrassed about getting a foot massage, except every now and again, maybe going in for a massage. That does happen. What I'm trying to work awkwardly towards is just the fact that this actually is part of monastic culture. Is senior teachers will invite junior monks, and I assume senior nuns invite junior nuns to give them these massages, and it's a very common institution in the sangha, because it allows for this informal, relaxed environment. You often will have, with Longpo Nan, who I ordained with, you'd have 6, 7 monks kind of massaging the feet, the calves, and it's just, Longpo doesn't really care about that, and we're all terrible at massage, or most of us are, but it's just a chance to just talk to him. You get the good stories, then the ones about all sorts of wild things. So there's an intimacy there. I'd say that's the big one. Is at least for senior monastics, there's this sort of chance for junior monastics to connect to them by these, and that happens almost every night in some monasteries. Like with Longpo Nan, we'd do it. We'd give them a foot massage every night and just talk, and it's very beautiful. So that's one way. That's one way. And then for me, I don't know. Sometimes people will help. They'll purchase a massage session, like maybe twice a year or something like that, and that's always a nice gift. Um, let's see. Sorry. Uh, I work with young children and have a young child myself, and find myself offering ample praise to kids. Is there anything unskillful with this? Hmm. Yeah, this is interesting. I mean, this sort of echoes Joseph's question on giving praise in a skillful way. And honestly, I hadn't thought about this angle. It's very relevant. I mean, I do think about it some. initially at Clear Mountain, we'd really single people out by name, and we do that sometimes. But what you start to notice is the person singled out, for doing something really good will feel quite good, and everyone else feels a twinge of like, why not me? So the longer we've done this, the more broad we've tried to make those inclusions. Like we had an acknowledgement of volunteers 2 weeks ago with this really fun cake. And just what we did is we had each group kind of stand and sit and be acknowledged. But because we were including so many people, there was this sense of most people being part of it, which was nice, or a lot of people instead of one person being singled out. I'd say the difference, how one can do it skillfully, perhaps with children, is really to praise the act. Um, I certainly feel comfortable about saying that for corrections, like not criticism is criticizing the person. You're a bad kid because you did this. A small complaint is more when you steal the truck from Jenny, it hurts her feelings. Wouldn't it be better to share? It notes the action and the mind state rather. And that I'd say is healthier. I'm interested if that carries over to praise because I could see there being real benefit in telling kids, such a kind person. And that's useful to look at is like, as Buddhists, sila and samadhi, ethics and concentration are about building a beautiful sense of self, one that's wholesome. Um, so there's a lot to be said for giving people that foundation. But then, yes, like once we have that foundation, notice the greed. It's like, a lot of us have enough material possessions and we have to get that for life. But notice the over and above, the desire for more, how it never ends. That's what the Buddha is putting his finger on. So giving children that basic level, that foundation of self-esteem is a good thing, I think, especially if it's skillfully done. But be aware of doing, what happens when you're doing it within earshot of another kid and don't give them the same praise. I mean, I think you do have to work skillfully with that. And um, in that case, maybe it is more skillful to praise a certain act so the other kid feels like they have access to that same route to goodness. Or maybe, yeah, that's going to be a fascinating thing to work with. But I would say giving children that foundation is wholesome if done skillfully. Tyler. I've been traveling this summer and I found it difficult to keep up my meditation practice while outside my regular environment. Do you have any advice for encouraging practice? Ah, yes. Yeah, I had this issue, as most monastics do, when you um, visit relatives at time. My mom and dad are wonderful and would encourage me to practice, but with many family commitments and such, it is hard to keep up. I'd say, first of all, just acknowledge that's probably part of traveling. It is harder. Um, Another thing is to help get from a teacher a encouragement to meditate. Um, so that when you're in a social gathering, you can say, instead of being like, I gotta go, I wanna go meditate, you can say, my teacher or a teacher I respect, or my teacher, whatever you want to say, really recommended I step back from meditation. Um, and I made a commitment to do that. I gotta go. I'm really sorry. And that way it's impersonal and it helps. Um, so it makes it less awkward. So, Tyler, meditate at night, uh, even if it means that you got to duck out of a social commitment early. And now you can say that someone, and you could, for the sake of this, call me your teacher if you want, just for this. You can say, use that as an excuse in at a dinner or something to say that you got to duck out and meditate. And the Buddha said to meditate. So take it seriously, do make it a priority. And if you need to make a commitment to someone, that you will meditate a certain amount every day, then that's really helpful. But leave some wiggle room. When you're traveling, things come up. It can't probably be as intense as when you're home, and just be forgiving with yourself. So, okay. Everyone, it's been wonderful. As always, we now move on to Zoom, where we have a really nice chance for a more intimate conversation. I'm pasting the link into the chat. If you don't see it, just go to the uh, website, clearmountainmonastery.org, and halfway down, you'll see an event listing for Wednesday Zooms, and just join us there. And um, just rejoicing in this community and the beauty of these practitioners coming together. May you all be well, and we'll see you on Saturday.